Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia, and with me is a fellow podcaster, host of the India Rising podcast, Mind Makers columnist, dear friend, and a fascinating analyst, Mohal Joshi. Hi, Mohal. And I would
Hi
say
Aadit.
returning champion. That's the word I'm told I should use, not alumni or anything. Returning champion. So we'll go.
Thanks Aadit for that kind introduction.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's such a weird week, this, right? Because it is, everything that has happened around the world. I mean,
Hmm.
the tragic thing, that tragic situation in India, it's getting a little better in some cities, but it seems to be going into rural, India.
Hmm.
Karnataka seems to be particularly vulnerable, but very positive news coming out from Bombay and Delhi, or Mumbai and Delhi, where the TPR has gone down
Hmm.
significantly, drastically. Vaccinations are in full swing, and Dr. S. Jaishankar is in America right now, our part of the world, talking to President Biden and Secretary Blinken and stuff. And I suspect a lot of announcements vis-a-vis vaccinations and raw materials should happen this week. He's here for 5 days, so 3 more days after today.
Hmm.
Um, so that's the news. In US, you saw the Israel Palestine sort of ceasefire happen. Now,
Hmm.
between there was a truce reached between the IDF and Hamas, and I don't know what is going to happen in the next few years. But this time, public opinion in America seemed to be divided. Strangely enough, America, the public opinion generally was always pro-Israel or something, but this time there you saw some marches and stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and how that's going to change in the days to come. But our primary focus is going to be about India, what is going to happen. Last podcast, as you saw, we did a whole economics discussion on how India can go into, rebound from that. This time we'll touch a little bit about vaccines, talk about the current situation, and we'll also talk about Indian politics because, of course, how can we not talk about it? India enters into a very interesting year of no elections this year now. I mean, yes, we saw Bengal and stuff, but for at least 9 or 10 months, there's not going to be any elections. So how will the permutations and combinations change? Interestingly, while today we're recording is May 24th, we'd heard that May was the deadline that the G23 group gave Rahul Gandhi. I don't know what has happened to that. And how is that going to pan out. And apart from that, I mean, in America, you have a whole new sort of situation happening where within the Democratic Party also you have power factions, where when Bernie Sanders is introducing one bill about Israel and Palestine, Joe Biden is making another statement. You have the Squad, you have the center left and the far left Democrats. So it's a fascinating time, right? So Mohal, your initial thoughts on what has happened this week, and then we can go straight into debates and discussions.
Yeah, as usual, a lot of things happening on the COVID front. I mean, in America, there's been the reopening. Plus, in terms of foreign policy, what has dominated the headlines is the Israel-Gaza conflict,
Hmm.
and also I think you mentioned too that the India, the situation in most of the states has been improving quite a bit. The Even the total positivity rate has been going down in
Hmm.
the major metro areas. So
Hmm.
hopefully, we see another. I mean, as sharply as the cases went up, I think it's down to, I think, from a high of 4 lakh per day new cases, we are down to 2.5 lakh. So hopefully it falls sharply
Yeah.
down as much as possible.
And one hopes the deaths, of course, reduce because the deaths are still hovering around 3,500, 4,000 mark.
Hmm.
So that is particular, area of concern. But let's go a little further into this whole thing, right? You have one side of the political spectrum, especially from the left and stuff, expressing vaccine hesitancy in weird sorts of ways. Now they've all like vaccine chahiye and all that, and which is good because vaccination and masking up is the only way out of this. I mean, there is
Hmm.
no other way. The scientists around the world have said everything else is a survival technique once you get COVID. The best thing is prevention, and how to do. And obviously washing hands and all is there, but the two major things are masking up and vaccinating. The debate, of course, is, can India scale up enough? Can India produce enough vaccines and so forth? So how do you view this in terms of, and I'm not going into merits and demerits of the production thing. That's for subject matter experts to decide on, what is the rate and how it can be ramped up. I'm looking at the whole distribution pattern, right? Are we going to see more players coming in, because India clearly needs about at least, I mean, even to vaccinate 70% of the population, we need at least 100 crore doses minimum.
Yeah, actually, it would be more, right? Because unless you have the single shot Johnson and Johnson, if you
Yeah, I
assume
mean,
like 70, I mean, we have like 100 crore adults.
yeah.
So even, I mean, keeping the, I know like the vaccine has been approved for even the 12-year-old crowd. So you
Mhm.
at least need 140 crore doses. So as per the estimates released by the government, they
Mhm.
say that they are on track to produce, I think, around 220 crore doses by the end of the year, which should be more than sufficient. The
Mhm.
challenge will be to then get the people vaccinated, especially in rural or far-flung areas
Yeah.
where there might be vaccine hesitancy, or uh, the ease of access, that where a person could exit their house, come to a vaccination center and get the vaccine. So they might have to go door to door to do the vaccination. So that will be the bigger logistical challenge. And also, right now we have the supply issue. So what has happened is that the vaccination, which was at 3 million per day and which was on par with America, has now come
Mhm.
down to 1.5 million per day, which is not a suitable thing, you know.
Absolutely, and that is the biggest problem, right? I mean, you have the raw materials issues and so forth, and
Mm-hmm.
Pfizer and Moderna are saying that they are not going to deal with states; they're only going to deal with the central government. So there is that issue as well, and then of course other Punawalas, and the mixed messaging from SII is not helping, right? One executive says this one, which is why I think that whatever other Punawala has made, all the right statements and everything. I think the government needs either a vaccine czar or a press secretary, which I've been shouting for the 7 years, past 7 years, just to talk about this. Clearly, bureaucracy and everything is not helping. There is the minister who does conferences, but they need a press secretary who comes out, answers questions, and dispels myths, because there is so much kite flying going on social media, and
Mm-hmm.
the far left is having a field day, and I mean they can do whatever they want on the political side, but they are completely making these crazy theories up and stuff, which have no basis in fact. So for that alone, I think there needs to be a press advisor.
Yeah, I mean, I think even on your podcast, you talk with others, and even I have mentioned this, that the government needs somebody, especially in a crisis like this, to clearly communicate what are the next steps, and
Mm,
just
mm,
to have a the face, to talk to the people every day. Because what many people have been upset is, I mean, they do understand that the severity of the second wave was quite a bit, but they feel that the government has sort of disappeared, and they are left on their own, and there's nobody to help. I mean, obviously the resources have been overstretched, and many didn't foresee the second wave coming, which was also another kind of oversight and issue. But I mean, it is having a human touch, like, somebody explaining stuff, that things were going to get better, or at least having at the day-to-day interaction
mm.
also helps reduce people's anxieties and fears. Because I think a lot of it is driven by anxiety or fear,
Yeah,
and when they're running around.
anxiety, fear, and WhatsApp forwards.
I mean, social media, yeah, I mean, it has its pros and
No,
cons.
what social media is bad, and pros and cons, but WhatsApp forwards are the bane. I mean, coming from these weird sort of nuskas that people are giving, which have no basis in fact, and I'm not saying all of them are weird, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
you have to follow your doctor. I mean,
Hmm.
you trust your medical professional to make the right decisions, but apart from that, this information logjam cannot happen. It has to come out, and then like you said, like, the whoever the press secretary is, whoever the person is speaking on social media, or just some empathy, and the way they are addressing, the tonality is a big difference as well. We
Hmm.
see that tone in the prime minister's voice, but that also needs to be reflected across the board,
I
right?
mean,
The
it,
same
it
sort
can
of
be a
thing.
minister, it can be a press secretary. I mean, whoever is like media
Yeah.
savvy has to come out and address. I mean,
No,
otherwise
I
it
think
just builds up a perception. I think a lot
three
of the
people.
perception is built even among some BJP supporters, that where is the government? We
Yeah,
don't
and
see
that's not.
anybody,
It's not a truthful, assumption at all. But the fact is, if there is an assumption, the best job for the government is to go out and correct it. I mean, the
Yeah.
you have to just pretty much respond and do a press conference, do a no holds bars press conference. I don't
Mhm.
know, what is the way out, but they have to start somewhere. And news channels are clearly not, the right place and stuff. But so that's the situation in India, and one just hopes that Mr. Jaishankar's meeting yields fruits. I honestly, this is one time I don't think the meeting is are not going to be anything to do with foreign policy, but they're going to be to do with diplomacy and trade diplomacy. So the external affairs minister is actually, here to have sort of the trade aspect to the foreign policy. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mohal.
Yeah, I think I mean a lot of the focus obviously will be on the pandemic and how US can send even more aid to India, especially on the vaccines. I mean, the US after all has those 60 million AstraZeneca vaccines, which I mean the US is not approving, and here
Right.
we are. I mean, clearly in the end stages of the. I mean, at least the vaccination phase. I mean, we don't know what the future holds, but hopefully it's not a severe third wave.
Hmm.
So, I mean, Biden has mentioned that he will be sending over the 60 million AstraZeneca doses. So clearly in a place like India it could do a lot of good, plus
Hmm.
the raw material for the Novavax vaccine which has been held up and which Aadit Punawala had alluded to being
Hmm.
not sent over.
Hmm. So yeah, so I mean, you think that's going to change the Novavax vaccine and everything?
I mean, in terms of the raw materials, you mean?
Yeah, raw materials and just, basically making sure that it is available to whoever.
I mean, in theory, you should. I mean, the US should not be holding back material. I'm not. I'm not an expert, so I don't know if there is a commonality if the material is to be used in Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. But let's say
Hmm.
if it was not going to be used in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, then definitely it should be sent over, because
Hmm.
it makes no sense for them to hold. Because let's say even if they had to make a theoretical booster dose down the road, if
Hmm.
the material is not common, but yeah, if the material is common, I mean, still they should release some of the raw materials that Novavax uh, production can be ramped up in
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
India. I mean, and hopefully, I mean, they submitted the data for approval in UK. So hopefully, if the approval comes through, then
Hmm.
maybe India can take that data from the UK trial. And I think it is even a trial in India
Hmm.
and roll it, because I think one of the important things was that we banked upon even before the second wave. Our theory was that we will bank upon mostly three vaccines. It was Novavax,
Hmm.
Covid Shield, and Covaxin. Now, Covid Shield and Covaxin are still out there, but the Novavax has been delayed for whatever reasons. I mean, I'm not privy to like what exactly happened there,
Hmm.
but I think that was a huge chunk of the supply falling out, and that's why I think the US got lucky that two of the vaccines they banked upon heavily,
Hmm.
they made it through. I mean, I know like AstraZeneca didn't make it through, but
Yeah.
uh, their bets paid off. I mean, they had diversified their portfolio quite a bit. They had a lot of money to throw around, so
Yeah.
uh, they did much better than India in terms of how many vaccines were available to them.
Available to them, and also, where they're produced and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
like initially India was focusing on the, but that's, water under the bridge and so forth. So let's just hope that Mr. Jaishankar's visit yields fruits, and this we can end this nightmare of waiting for COVID to go, and it goes away and we beat it out. So who knows how this is going to happen. By the way, interestingly, Washington Post yesterday, I think, or was it Wall Street Journal, had about the origins of COVID vaccine. Now they are suddenly debating again. Surprise, surprise! After the election, because I think Shekhar Gupta did a video where he pointed out that how the people clearly giving clean chit to this, this didn't come out of a lab or this didn't do that. They had such conflicts of interest, and that's
Hmm.
the problem, right? You have had some articles about HCQ and Lancet and stuff which have been problematic as well, and some articles have been rescinded, and I mean all sorts of things are going on. So
Even Shekhar Gupta even did a second video today. I think there's a second story broken in the Wall Street Journal that three researchers at the Wuhan Institute of
that's the one
Virology
example.
uh, got sick around November 2019, which was a kind of
Yeah.
interesting that I mean, they had to be hospitalized. Sorry, it's not just like you get regular flu and three people got flu at the same time, but had to be hospitalized at the same time. I think it all came because of the brilliant article by I think he was like former New York Times science editor Nicholas Wade. So I
Mm.
think that has brought up churned up a lot of new.
Hmm.
information on why it
Yeah.
doesn't appear. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. Obviously, there's no smoking gun because China is not going to allow any impartial investigation for
Yeah.
obvious reasons, But yeah, it is the accidental lab theory is back in vogue now after the
And
after the article by Nicholas Wade.
And then they'll be helped with these weird theories by the comedians over here who just, in America, who just refuse to look at the facts. And they come up with these strange sort of theories. And like it or not, most of America listens to these comedians, or at least a section of America does. And they just come up with their complete wild theory. I saw same during Israel and Palestine also. Something about, it's just unbelievable. And I'm like, boss, I understand, the urge to take on political issues, do that, but presents all sides of the discourse. Don't just, take your ideology and ram through everything. Right. So that just gives me a good segue to go into what is happening in the Middle East. Right. So I think there is a
Yeah.
temporary ceasefire. America must have intervened or something. But everyone seems to think that Bibi also wants some sort of a commitment about Iran. And then of course there is the whole Hamas angle with the Palestine and stuff like that, and the bombings from Israel into Palestine, and then Palestine firing rockets, and I mean all sorts of things. Uh, it's just, this reminds me of a line that Sunanda always used to say about Kashmir, that peace in Kashmir is time between two conflicts, right?
Mhm.
And I've always told her that this sort of applies to Israel and Palestine as well. I always joke with her, patent that line. So hey, here you have video evidence that I'm telling you about. But that is it is her line. But coming back to this, what do you think? What do you make out of this?
I mean, it's a pretty complex issue. So, I don't know if everybody had read through it. There's a land dispute in some of the settlements in East Jerusalem. So
Hmm.
the Jewish settlers had argued that pre 1948 that
Hmm.
they had been their ancestors had bought the land in East Jerusalem. Now, post 48, like as you know, Jordan and the neighboring countries invaded and they took over the area, and
Hmm.
Arab settlers settled in the area.
Hmm.
Now, post 67, like Israel was able to capture the West Bank, and I mean, the history everybody knows since then. So the lower court had given the right that, okay, these guys are own the land, and basically,
Hmm.
these guys have to pay up or like, evict.
Hmm. Hmm.
So some of the I mean, the Arab folks who were living there for like the past 40 years, they said, like, we are not going to just pack up and leave.
Hmm.
So they wanted to appeal to the Supreme Court in Israel, which the verdict interestingly hasn't come. But
Hmm.
some of the Jewish settlers, I mean, who were insistent upon getting I mean, confronted the woman, and the video became viral. So that was like one of the trigger points that uh
Yeah.
that before the Supreme Court judgment, they were trying to forcefully take them out. And I mean, we were saying, like, we were in here from 40 years, so what's going on? So that was one thing. The other thing was at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There were like uh, during the holy month of Ramadan, they are like Friday prayers usually
Hmm.
happening every Friday. So like this eviction in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which
Hmm.
is just north of the East Jerusalem, was one trigger. The second trigger was that due to the COVID protocols, I mean, I don't remember if maybe there was Ramadan last year also was under COVID. So they had tightened up the protocols, and the number of people that put up barricades, and even the number of people allowed was reduced. So there
Hmm.
was stone pelting at the Israelis because the Palestinians were mad about some of these developments.
Hmm.
And it uh, I mean, like, there was violence and stone pelting, and then they responded, like Israeli police responded. So there was this built up anger. And the third angle was the Hamas angle. So in the West Bank, they were supposed to held elections, but
Hmm.
the Fatah, like the or Muhammad Abbas, he postponed the election. So
Hmm.
the Hamas thought, like, oh, this was a good opportunity, that by firing rockets we can show our dominance over Fatah. Like, so in the next election, maybe they can take advantage of it.
Hmm.
Plus the simmering discontent over the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, and the violence that happened at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it all precipitated into this violence where Hamas started firing rockets, and obviously then everybody knows the story. Then they just tit for tat bombings and reprisals.
Yeah. 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 No, and then then you get the international powers involved, and then you have every groups in each their respective countries trying to focus on कि अच्छा इस पे focus करो,
Yeah,
trying
yeah,
to
yeah.
lobby for the version they sort of believe in, and then you have the tragic killing of children, which is obviously
Hmm.
reprehensible and indefensible. So it's just, I mean, and I don't mean to preface that statement with a then, but it's almost like this weird circle that keeps going again and again and again, and there is no end in sight. So I don't know where that comes. I don't know where, if US has to intervene or something, but something's got to happen. And I don't know with the change in leadership how this will pan out, but it remains to be seen. Before we move to the next topic, though, Mohan, do
Hmm.
you think that this administration's views vis-a-vis Iran are going to change, and maybe that might sort of impact the relationship with Israel, or no?
I mean, during the Obama administration, they did have the JCPOA and did try
Yeah,
to,
the deal,
yeah,
basically.
the Iran nuclear deal, as it's referred
Correct.
to. They did try
Right.
to see if they can bring Iran back into the fold, but I mean, it appears, I mean, they have made some gestures as to reconciliation with the Iranians, but a
Mhm.
lot has to be seen. They could be like I mean, with the Middle East, you never know what could happen tomorrow. So there
Mhm.
could be unforeseen events which might force Biden's side to take a more hawkish stance.
Yeah.
But for now, it looks like it's a middle of the road approach where it's neither the hard approach by Trump, but neither the soft approach by Obama. It's somewhere in between.
And to be honest, I don't know what hawkish America in the Middle East seems to be, because every president has their own idea of what hawkish seems to be.
I meant hawkish towards Iran, I meant.
Towards Iran, yeah, because towards Saudi Arabia, that there seems to be bipartisan consensus now, more
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah,
than
yeah.
that relationship is there, and obviously with the peace deals with Israel, with UAE and others signing with them. So I think,
Yeah, I mean, also the Abraham record. So, like, with this violence, the UAE and Bahrain have been put in a tough spot because they recognize the right of Israel to exist and establish diplomatic relations.
I think
But
even
now,
Bangladesh did. Even Bangladesh took out their restriction on the passport or something because it was not
maybe I
more.
missed that, but I know like Sudan, UAE, and I think Bahrain, they did
Yeah.
establish. So now they're caught in a bind. I mean, obviously, all of them now implicitly support the two-state solution, but I
Mm.
think until you get to the hard question of East Jerusalem, I think it's going to be an nobody's going to concede that. So unless you settle East Jerusalem, I think it's never going to. I mean, we're going to
Yeah.
be having these perpetual cycles of violence.
Basically, I'm reading a report, I think a day ago. They said the foreign ministry said no change in policy towards Tel Aviv, but Bangladesh essentially dropped the word from except Israel, because it said something like the passport is allowed everywhere except Israel, and that
Hmm.
words are gone. So it's very interesting. So I have a feeling that there is some sort of softening also, and Bangladesh has been very interesting under the new Sheikh Hasina regime. I mean, it's a continuation of our old regime, but that has been a very different stance that they have taken. So let's
So
hope.
one last point I wanted to make. So like the foreign policy, if you see the Biden, like a lot of it hasn't changed except maybe Iran. Like there's still the trade. Uh, what you call the trade tariff with China exists. We still
Mhm.
have an antagonistic relationship with China.
Right.
Trump wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan. Biden wants to withdraw from Afghanistan. Iran is an exception. I'll keep it on the side, and
Hmm.
maybe Russia could be a different exception. There might be more hostility towards Russia, but if you look at the Middle East, I mean, when I mean, they moved in the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I mean, a lot of the far left had opposed it, saying like this was not as per the UN charter or resolutions. So
Hmm.
now Biden, I mean, I mean, technically, you would think that if a left wing administration came in, they would move it back to Tel Aviv. But you haven't heard a peep. So I think Biden is kind of straddling that between Trump and between Obama, somewhere in the between, where
Hmm.
I think what the recent events have shown that maybe if it escalates to full out violence, he will probably put pressure on Israel, but otherwise he will still support Israel solidly. So it's
Hmm.
kind of this weird mix, which actually is not a bad. It's like kind of centrist policy between Obama and Trump is what I think Biden is following.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's see how that pans out, and
Hmm.
remains to be seen. And of course, his first challenge is going to be in a year, when the midterms happen, or a year and a half. I know it's only
Hmm.
been 6 months since it's elected, but America is in constant fundraising and election mode. We'll see how that works out. So moving on from Biden, Palestine, Israel, to back to India.
Hmm.
Like we're taking flights and going into Indian politics, right? Um, i- you would think that Rahul Gandhi would sense this opportunity to cobble up an opposition coalition or some sort of a thing, or some leadership in Congress would emerge. But it seems like Congress is probably even further away from power than they were in 2019. And there's so much confusion going on what sort of line they want to take, right? Because it seems like this Ashok Malik had this wonderful line a few years ago on a TV debate, I forget, where they said the Congress wants to be Rahul to be Rajiv Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi himself wants to be Arvind Kejriwal. And it seems like he wants to be this far left activist child on Twitter who, I mean, he wants to be probably a variation of Greta Thunberg meets, I don't know, some other activist where he sounds very woke and a thing on Twitter, but really doesn't want any power or responsibility. And by responsibility, I mean not just that, having accountability for defeats. If he doesn't want to be the president, he said so, why the hell do they keep propping him up, or his mother?
I mean, yeah, I mean, they have an existential crisis, which is not a secret. I mean, the
Yeah.
question is that, I mean, let's say even if in the 2019 election, I mean, Congress did have a solid 20% vote share now, or 19% probably, or
Yeah.
something in that. So, but like the question remains that, uh, I mean, whatever is the distrust, or let's say not a fan of BJP or Modi, the voters, you have to coalesce everybody along a single coalition, right? So
Yeah.
unless you have that united coalition, I mean, I think Bengal was a good example that if the in the opposition, if the vote coalesced around Mamta, the
Mm.
CPI and the Congress and the left melted away,
Mm.
then you could have a runaway election. I'm not trying to compare like Mamta's popularity in the national level. I think I'm just giving an example that I mean, BJP, even I know like many people criticize it, but it did had a 38% vote share, right? Which is not no joke. So
Yeah,
like I mean,
and
you need the
ramping
vote
this
to
up
coalesce.
yeah, and ramping this up nationally is going to be this repeat plus the 4 or 5 extra percent that Prime Minister brings himself, because national election is to elect him. So
Yeah,
I mean, and 43, I mean, 4 or 5% swing, and then it's a dead heat election. Then it can
yeah.
go anyway.
But I
So
mean, the main thing is that if let's say Rahul Gandhi doesn't want to stand as the leader of opposition, will Congress mentally and I mean physically, I mean on the ground, cede space to have project, let's say a Mamta or a Sharad Pawar or somebody else as the leader of opposition? So because they want to eat their cake and also have it at the same
yeah,
time. I mean,
absolutely,
they
absolutely.
want they want to be the primary leader, but the primary leader doesn't want to be actively on the ground all the time. So they have to choose one of the two. They cannot have it both ways. They either have to concede, okay, we will be the backbone
Hmm.
which will drive the next government and have project somebody as a leader, and maybe you give them little bit more seats than what you used to.
Hmm.
Obviously Congress will still fight majority of seats because most of the parties don't even have a presence nationwide, and then
Hmm.
say we will be the engine and you be the leader,
Hmm.
or we have the leader and like you guys join us, but then the leader has to be active. So because what happens, like I think even in the if you look at the last election, 20 to 30% of the voters decided in the last week on whom to vote for.
Hmm.
So what happens is like in the end, like the image projection by Modi, like people are might be even not be satisfied with Modi fully. I mean, there is a lot who are satisfied, but even the unsatisfied would say like, okay, who what is my choice? If on the other side it's somebody who is disinterested as Rahul Gandhi, then they will just grudgingly just vote for Modi. So it doesn't help his cause at all.
No, no, absolutely. I agree with you completely. So it just makes it more complicated, so to speak. But yeah, no, I personally feel that I mean they are nowhere close to posing a challenge. Yes, with 20%,
Mm-hmm.
it's a force to reckon with. But right now, the credibility of the Gandhi family and Rahul Gandhi himself is so low that whatever they say and done, they do, and then rightfully so. I mean, he's made, apart from sounding okay and making a couple of statements here and there, and I mean, I don't even think he sounds okay, but um, he tried
I
to
mean,
do
even the
what.
many of the intellectuals who've been supporting or indirectly or directly the Congress have been telling, like, that Rahul Gandhi either needs to work harder or just make way for somebody else to be an opposition leader to give a better challenge to the BJP. So it's not even their supporters are now see the writing on the wall that there's nothing that can happen now.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So that's the most interesting part. So I don't know how this is going to pan out, but yeah, we'll see in days or weeks to come what will happen. So that's sort of my take on this. As we move to the closure of the podcast, to the last part of the podcast, any recommendations you have? Any news that you've heard in the last few days?
Uh, I guess I would say anything other than Radhe, right?
I don't know what kind of. I haven't watched it, but someone sent me the trailer, and that itself just looked horrible.
I mean, hopefully, no, you don't get any hate mail from Salman fans after this,
No, I don't.
podcast.
Honestly, if they're real fans, they should tell him that Radhe is absolute horrible.
I mean, the amount of memes it has generated. I think
Yeah,
I mean, during the dark days of the pandemic, the only thing which had was uplifting for us as Indians was the amount of sheer memes that Radhe has created.
yeah, and I love Rahman. Like I worship Rahman, but I've criticized when A.R. Rahman hasn't given good music. It's not like every album is gold. So I don't understand why do Salman Khan fans feel that everything that Bhai touches to gold. I mean, yes, he can make a
uh,
shit film too, or he can be, and I mean,
mhm,
clearly, he just keeps making the same thing. And I mean, I have to say, Prabhu Deva he pretty much just directs the same damn thing again and again and again.
mhm.
With Akshay Kumar, with Salman Khan, it's like repeat, repeat, repeat. And I mean,
I
maybe
mean, the
people.
story sounds very cliche. I mean, when I read it, I was like,
I
okay,
mean, the
this
Wanted,
one interests
the,
me.
yeah, the movie Wanted is story itself was cliche also, which started this whole thing avatar of Salman Khan. But
Yeah. Anyway, so my recommendation for the week, I think, is this Nicholas Wade article, which
mm,
goes
mm,
into this accidental lab theory,
yeah,
which goes into quite a bit of detail that how he tries to say that, okay, there are a lot of these factors which would make one wonder actually that did it jump from animals. It sounds very unconvincing. I mean, for the animal jumping the theory, I mean, we know the code,
mm,
the genetic code is very similar to bats, but they
mm,
say in SARS-1 and in MERS, the
mm,
Middle East respiratory, like, you found a in between animal within 4 to 9 months. Now obviously the amount of uh, focus on the pandemic has been like probably 100x like those pandemics.
mm.
So we would have found an intermediary animal which from which it jumped to humans. So there are like many of these small clues which makes it more and more obvious that maybe it might have just been an accidental leak from a lab. So that would be my one recommendation.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic, fascinating take. My recommendation is going to be a little hutke this time. It's a TV show that came out last year, but I just watched it called Ted Lasso it's on Apple TV Plus. It's about a NFL coach who goes, or a American football coach who is forced to go to, or goes to Britain and becomes a soccer or a football coach there. And Jason Sudeikis plays. It's a heartwarming story. Nothing like you haven't seen before. I mean, it's a sports show, right? But it's very funny. And then another show I watched on HBO called Hacks. It's about an aging comedian who teams up with a writer. Two very different shows, but outstanding writing, very funny. And do watch it, right? Because I know everyone's had a tough time. I've lost very close family, and friends, and so has Mohal, and so have all of you. But and keep we have to keep the spirits up. We have to help out everyone. But if watching a 30-minute clip helps you at least smile through the night, watch it, clear your mind up, and then go back and work vigorously, because together with our help and with vaccination is only way we're going to defeat COVID. So, here's a shout out to all the frontline workers, medical workers, government
Mhm.
officials, everyone. busting, they're busting their butts basically to make sure this happens. That's an American phrase, guys. Don't kill me for it. It's used, but they are busting to make sure that they fight the pandemic. So our heart goes out to them, and a huge shout out to them. And Mindmakers will always stand in support with them. But having said that, we'll be back very soon with more discussions, debates, and with all the topics we've covered, maybe we'll have a sequel of that. Thank you so much, Mohal, for joining. This was
Yeah, thanks,
really
Adit.
fun. All right, guys, we'll be back. Please follow us on Twitter. Please subscribe to the YouTube page. Please like the Facebook page. We'll be back next week. Thanks.